So, you have just been named an emergency management coordinator, or perhaps you are a manager or elected official who has appointed one. And now you may be asking, what does a mature emergency program actually look like? In this episode, my guest is Sean Kaufman, Fire Director for the Center Region Council of Governments and Emergency Management Coordinator for the region. Sean brings more than 40 years of experience in emergency services, including service as a junior firefighter, volunteer firefighter, EMS provider, 911 dispatcher, emergency management coordinator, and fire director. Together, we talk about emergency management as a field that depends on local knowledge, technical skill, and perhaps most importantly, the building of an infrastructure of relationships that allows people, agencies, municipalities, counties, institutions, and community partners to work together when something unexpected happens. Sean helps us understand why the word coordinator is so important. This role is not simply about command. It is about knowing who needs to be at the table, how resources connect, where the gaps may be, and how to build trust before the emergency occurs. We discuss the importance of breaking down silos, working closely with county and state partners, regionalizing where it makes sense, and preparing for no-notice events that test every relationship and every plan. We also look to the future of emergency management, where technology, AI, communication systems, and predictive tools will become more powerful. But as Sean reminds us, the human work remains essential. A computer will not bring people together. A coordinator does that. This is an episode for local government leaders, emergency service professionals, and volunteers who love this work and want to understand how they might grow into it. At its heart, this is a conversation about what communities need before the sirens sound. This is another episode in the 2026 APMM series in partnership with PCC Local Time. We are so glad you're here. Check out the show notes for more information. Let's get started. Sean, it is just so wonderful to be able to have this conversation with you. It's been a few months in development, and if you could, in your own words, talk a little bit about how you describe your role to people.
And so the center region, I'm the fire director, and we have oversight for both fire and emergency management in the center region, which is 6 municipalities that are basically the State College area school district. So when we say regional, we think of ourselves as a program of 6 municipalities. Some participate in just fire and others participate in both fire and emergency management.
Yeah.
The 6 municipalities have decided to regionalize their emergency management program, and that's kind of how I fit into that.
One of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you has to do with the scope, the inclusiveness of the region, that you have, the fact that you're able to work across organizations in emergency management. It seems to be a skill, it's something that the region has developed over time. But one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is that through the years in my work with local government, I have interviewed people who will tell me I'm new to emergency management. So you can really feel that there's this learning curve that is necessary. And I would say also a degree of maturity that you could feel when you're talking to emergency management director or coordinator who has been doing this for a long time. And so I want to talk about that arc and help any elected leaders or managers who might be listening to think about what a mature emergency management planning, whether it's an apartment or a single person, what that looks like or feels like. How do you know you are getting to that mature place?
Yeah, so in our area, the region makes up not only the municipalities, but we have a major Big Ten university here. So we have what at one time I considered a bunch of silos. We all worked on our own things. We did our own business, and it became very difficult during a major emergency to bring all those players together. And I think if somebody is trying to develop a program or just a person is understanding what does your municipality need and what people are involved in getting you those resources. So, from the standpoint of as our program started to develop, we had an individual who was the public works director, and they were on paper as the emergency management coordinator. And they would put that other hat on during a disaster or some type of major event and try to help out. As you develop the program, whether it's somebody who has a first responder background or just an interest in helping the community, developing that coordination piece of emergency management coordinator title is probably the
Hmm.
most important thing. So
Hmm.
understanding that you may not be the one that's in charge of taking care of all the emergencies, but you're coordinating all those individuals who are. And that's probably one of the things that we've done the best at in our region is develop that coordination piece between our municipalities, Penn State University, and then all the agencies within the region have developed a partnership that when a disaster strikes of whatever type, that we know that we have the resources necessary to help assist with that.
Yeah. And how does that relationship happen? Are you coordinating events, whether it's training events, or do you have even more informal gatherings or get togethers, task forces? How does it look?
Yeah. So we've developed several avenues for planning. Some are as simple as a quarterly meeting with all the chiefs, whether it's a police chief, fire chief, EMS chief, public works folks meet on a regular basis. And we just have open discussions about what the agencies are doing, what's new in our agencies. Those meetings may focus around a certain planned event. One of the things that we deal with 7 times a year is a major football game at Beaver Stadium. So that planning effort occurs on a regular basis, even with another group that meets regularly and not just quarterly. So having the opportunity to bring those agencies together on a regular basis so that you're not exchanging business cards at 2 a.m. with somebody
Yes.
that you've never met, but that you've built that trust up during these non-emergency events and planning sessions so that everybody knows what everybody's duties are during a response and what their duties are during the planning of a major event. So you don't miss anything. And that's usually where we run into problems if something's happening and we don't address all the issues, something slips by and causes a problem.
Yeah. Would you say that if you think about emergency management, is it to a large extent local knowledge? In other words, what you need to learn from those around you who've experienced all the varieties of things that can happen in that area. Is that equally weighted with what you might call more like technical expertise that you would learn through trainings of how you, whether it's document or coordinate or track, for instance? How would you weigh those two pieces, the technical versus the local knowledge and experience?
I think first off, the local knowledge and the understanding of your community, whatever size that is probably the most important because when something happens and people come to try to help you, you're going to be the person that coordinates those resources with the local resources. And then you start to develop that understanding of what is more of the system of emergency management, which I described earlier that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has the lowest level of government is the municipality, whereas many states, the lowest government is a county. So when you're trying to interact with
Huh.
the assistance that's coming in, the federal government may not recognize a local municipality as the lowest form of government. They may stop at the county level. So when we look at the program, that training comes with time. So you take the initial independent study programs, and then you start taking a higher level, federal level programs to help explain that coordination between the agencies.
Yeah. So in Pennsylvania, would you say that it's very important for the local emergency management person assigned to work closely with that county person? Is that a critical piece here?
Yeah, in the Commonwealth, that's a necessity. And that's sometimes where some of the breakdown happens because, especially the
Yeah.
smaller municipalities, tend not to have a volunteer that's committed to that level of
Yes.
time commitment to develop that relationship and continue that relationship. So, in those cases, like what happened in our area, is that we decided, well, let's regionalize. Instead of having 6 emergency management coordinators, let's have one because we were all the same school district. We had the same events affecting our community, the same weather events affected our community, those type of things. So, you can identify those factors that may say, hey, let's regionalize our programs rather than just try to have one coordinator.
Yeah. And we know regionalization is not easy in the state of Pennsylvania, but I'm really glad you said, I didn't have to say it, but those are, some of the appointments that are made as emergency management coordinator that maybe don't have, I would say, local knowledge to really ask the questions that need to be asked. And I think the example that I give is a particular municipality that went through disastrous flooding. And I can never remember if it was 2012, but it was right around there. We had stories of really bad flooding, and I was working with a municipality that had an emergency management coordinator that had not done anything that the county had requested, which was to track addresses, who was in all of the apartments. And so as a result, the local team did not know who was, might be missing in that flood. So that was just an example that I witnessed sort of firsthand. And I thought, how does that happen? And so your idea to regionalize, I'm thinking that there may be some resistance to that in other areas of the state. And I wonder how that might come about. Would you say typically they're going to get together? I mean, would it be typical that emergency management coordinator people are all going to meet at some point, that they could discuss this idea of regionalizing?
So within the Commonwealth, like we have our regional program, and then there's the county level, and then the county is all part of another level of regionalization, which they call the regional task forces, which is one level kind of below the state government. So for my area, I'm part of the South Central Mountain Regional Task Force, and they were after 9/11 and some of the funding around terrorism. And they were originally called Terrorism Task Force, but they've changed their names now to just Regional Task Forces. And so in my case, the 8 county emergency managers meet on a regular basis to not only discuss, planning issues, but there's some funding available that gets distributed out to the counties and then local municipalities, for equipment and other things to develop regional teams. And so the
Mhm.
concept at the county level is not foreign to any of them. They understand regionalization, obviously, but it's that identification point at, how do you identify that? And in most counties, there's some planning mechanism, and that planning mechanism in their county government may have the opportunity to say, hey, look, there's already an established region where we plan for growth and development. It might make sense that that region also plans for emergencies. And so that's one way to identify, what regions might already be established. In our case, I said we're a school district. Basically, all the municipalities are in a school district. So you could look at a school district and say, how many municipalities are served by this school district? Do they have the same geographic boundaries? Are they, sharing same emergency resources? And then kind of identify it that way as well. But there's many mechanisms in place to identify a region. It's just whether or not there's cooperation amongst those municipalities.
Right. There is some necessary leadership there to sort of see that connection. Also, I think to see it as an asset. Your fire department is viewed as such an asset because it's been well developed. If you describe that a little bit, I think you said there is not a paid fire department between you and Altoona, and that's quite a distance. If for our listeners, that's how far? An
Yeah,
hour.
you're 45 minutes to an hour to get resources that are staffed. I mean, we have great
Mm.
volunteer services in our area. There's no doubt about it. But one of the things that the Commonwealth's struggling with is the lack of volunteers. And as we look at our responses and how we're going to get assistance to our communities during a disaster, we have to look beyond our borders.
So this again is increasing this need to look at regionalization, but also looking at it again, I think of as an asset to be able to say to developers coming in. I just did a piece with Carrie Knapp at College Township. And so there's a lot of economic development in the area. And I would think that emergency management would be one of that due diligence that anyone that's thinking about investing in an area would have to ask, what are the assets with relative to if a disaster should happen? And interestingly, I asked you the question about what keeps you up at night. And I thought it would be fire because of your history with fire, but that was not your response. And could you tell me a little bit about how you responded and explain the kinds of things that you think about when you go through the scenarios in your head of what is necessary to plan for.
When we look at our region, we have a lot of transient community members who don't necessarily spend their entire life in the State College area. Because of that, we constantly have an influx of new people, and things like an ice storm or a weather event, like a wind event, like that causes a major power outage. It's those type of events, those no notice events, that we really don't have a grasp of what the damage is going to be before the storm occurs, that make it difficult for us to communicate with our community and keep them up to date. Now, there's
Mm,
plenty of people here that live here all the time, but probably over half of our population come and go. So creating that knowledge of exactly how to deal with those type of emergencies and what resources are available to them become problematic. So when you get into day 2 or 3 of a power outage and people are really starting to be affected by not having power, getting that message out can be difficult in a transient community. And then, as I think we spoke about, kind of what's new in our culture, I guess now is the active violence type incident, and those they scare the heck out of me, just because
yeah,
I know that's going to occur at some point in time, but you just don't know when and how severe it's going to be. So we plan around those events, but nobody wants it to occur. So the process of planning becomes difficult because you don't know the severity of it. If you
yeah,
always plan
yeah,
for the worst case, then we might overplan sometimes, but sometimes we might underplan. Those type of things. And I call them no notice events, those things that you just, you don't know it's going to really have the impact of it until it occurs.
yeah. And Sean, just to put a footnote here, you have been how many years now with the department there in State College?
Yeah, so I've been doing emergency services for 40 years now here
For
in
40
Seattle.
years. Okay.
So I started as a junior firefighter in Boalsburg when I was 17. So you can do the
Yeah.
math.
Yeah.
The last 4 years, I've been working with the fire department as their fire director. And then before that, 15 years as the emergency management coordinator. And the entire time I was a volunteer with the fire department, and I ran with the emergency medical services. I was a 911 dispatcher. So, I have a lot of background in the community.
There's so much there that I'm sure is not in any of your bios. There's probably it's endless sort of ways that you contributed. And I raise this point because when I think about these disaster events, what I have learned from the fire chief, actually from Antwerp, who meets with a lot of the fire chiefs in the United States, and he talked about the infrastructure of relationship. And he's researched this, and I find it compelling in so many ways. And you think about a major, something unexpected and unheard of, what might happen. And the one thing that you can say is that there are strong relationships. You have a really pretty high level of predictability that there are going to be people that are going to reach out. They're going to, if they don't have an answer or solution, they're going to step up into that void and you're going to work together on it. So I do want to return to this idea you'd mentioned earlier that years ago you realized that you were working in silos. And so I want to just explain for those who might wonder, what do you mean by working in silos? And what is it that makes it difficult to step outside of your silo? What is the resistance?
So I think if you just take an agency, for example, since I'm sitting in State College Borough, and State College Borough has a public works department and they work day to day, they do their thing, and they very rarely have to work with other agencies. All their planning and everything occurs in that silo. And
Yeah.
then next is Penn State, and there's a major university, and they're semi-private, and they have their agencies that do those type of events. And when a disaster happens, then everybody was just doing their own thing. But that gray area between the two agencies was where there was usually a gap, where these are students, but they live in the borough. So who takes care of them? Those type of questions would come up. And if you don't
Hmm.
have the opportunity to kind of break that silo down and plan as a community, then you're going to run into problems. There's going to be that gap in service to somebody. We've identified that over the years in many planning sessions. And I'm not saying it doesn't still occur a little bit, but from the standpoint of our efforts, everybody knows that there are planning sessions going on and why and what's involved. And when somebody reaches out and says, I need help, everybody knows how that's going to occur and when payment's expected and when payment's not expected and those type of things. So there's no second guessing, and it speeds up the process, especially during a no notice event that we all know each other.
So again, there are just opportunities to interact with each other and to have the kind of questions. And going back to that local knowledge, every time those interactions occur, you have to have enough curiosity to say, well, have we thought of this, or who's taking care of that? I'm just trying to imagine what this looks like when you all get together. And I know it may be hard for you to step out of yourself and describe what it looks like. But if we were to be right now doing a 3-minute sort of recruitment stitch here, what would make someone good in this role in emergency management? What's the type of individual that would be a really great contributor?
Yeah. So one of the things that people, I think they get, say, tunnel vision on is that emergency manager always has to be a first responder. And that's not necessarily the case. So again, an emergency manager by title is usually called a coordinator. So you need to have somebody who's good in that role of coordinating agencies. And so you can find somebody who might be in your planning department. They might be in your public works department. They might be an emergency responder. They may be an emergency responder that doesn't necessarily want to be on the front lines all the time, but does like doing the support activities and the logistics involved in those type of things. Trying to figure out what that person's interests are and then get them involved from that standpoint. I had a story about an intern that we had. It happened to be a family friend whose daughter had an interest in emergency management. So I put her on as an intern, and now she's working in county emergency management in the state of New York. She never was a first responder, and she just fell in love with it and became passionate about doing emergency coordination and planning. And so you just have to find somebody with that type of interest. And once you get that interest, then you go from there and develop them through the training and stuff that's available.
Yeah. Can you describe like what that falling in love is about? I think I have an idea of it, but I'm curious from your perspective.
Oh.
What she been falling in love with? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just sheer ability to bring people together for a common cause. So it's, like I said, if we're planning an event, if we're all doing our own thing, we're not thinking about how that impacts others. And so when we, as a good emergency manager, bring everybody to the table, that person just basically coordinates and facilitates that discussion so that everybody understands how an event will impact the others and what resources are needed to make sure that the event runs smoothly.
So a good facilitator and somebody, I imagine, who is sort of looking at the community and what possible resources are there, bringing people into the conversation. Can you describe maybe some unlikely people that are brought into these conversations that are part of the community that we might not think about that need to be there?
So I can tell you, so we do major planning around our Central Pennsylvania Arts Festival. And
Mm.
so the Arts Festival staff are part of it, but you need to have public works involved. So you know who's emptying the trash so that the trash cans get emptied. And simple thing is, if dumpsters are overflowing, it's an attractive nuisance and somebody might light the dumpster on fire. So then it impacts the fire department. Where these things are located in terms of locating certain trailers or water stations or whatever, and how does that impact the access for fire vehicles? Those are some of the discussions that occur. Somebody will say, well, we're doing this year, and then somebody will look at them strangely and say, well, you've never done that before. Now, how is that going to impact us? And so when you bring in those events, you may think it's simple. It's just how does it impact the public works department? But no, the public works department can then impact the fire department, which could impact EMS being able to respond properly. Weather, how does it impact the need for EMS to increase their numbers if it's extremely hot during one of our summer events or extremely cold during one of our winter events? And what are those impacts to the overall events? Right now, I'm planning around a road closure that's going to impact our fire department response, but I'm going to bring in the Downtown Business Association because local deliveries are going to be impacted so that we all understand it's not just one agency that's impacted. The road closure is going to impact local business and residents and local traffic and those type of things that could be a problem for our community.
Yeah. So you're really gathering a lot of different perspectives to what could possibly be factors that are novel in a situation. And I could see where State College, there's just, you have this very rich environment there that's varied. And also you have the population density and then you have the rural area. So if you're hanging out with some of your fellow responders in emergency management and recalling some incidents, over the years, are there any that stand out that maybe presented particular challenges that you had to work through that were memorable?
Yeah, so two kind of stand out, and one was a major snowstorm in October. And so October in central Pennsylvania, it's still pretty green. There's a lot of leaves on the trees still. So we had a major power outage. And that happened to occur just a few days before homecoming weekend for Penn State. And so that was one of the things that got me working outside of the silo was, hey, we had this major storm, tens of thousands of people without power. And we had the university whose major goal was to try to get the university up and running so that they could have a football game on Saturday and a parade Friday night. You can see how they kind of conflict, right, in
Mhm.
terms of the priorities. And at that time, we weren't really working well together, I would say. We had a plan on paper that we were going to have together, but they were giving out one message about football weekend, and we were giving out one message about power outages and where shelters are located and how you can get water and ice and those type of things. We should have been putting those messages out as one. Hey, there is this major event, but our community is impacted and we need these things for our community. So that was one of them. And then another major event that we plan around it's called Ag Progress Days. It's a 3-day agricultural expo. And it's in the rural part of our community. It's almost 15 miles outside of town. So we never had a fire department stand by at that event. So we had this community out there and they had their EMS people standing by and there was police there. And obviously Penn State had their operations for public works type activities, but there was no real fire standby. And one of the things I did when I took over the position was, hey, we're going to have to put people there because this is a community within our community now. And we don't have fire service out here. And by the time we get here, what might have been a minor fire is going to be a major incident. And so we transformed our planning team into having fire involved in that. And then now we have, a fire department, a mini fire department for those 3 days in that sub community. So just those type of events have formed what I think is that cooperative planning process, breaking down a lot of those silos.
Yeah, and I'd like to just emphasize the leadership and I think this is important because in a lot of communities that doesn't really exist. There is a decision of do we need a director to oversee and coordinate? And as you said, we don't always have close relationships with our county agencies. So I think you're an example in your role and how it's been developed in your region as somebody who can speak up and say, we need to do XYZ. I don't know if you feel comfortable or if you could speak to some of the resistance that can happen. If there is that leadership vacuum, there's not somebody who ultimately says, we really need to take these steps in this direction. And particularly if it's a breaking down a silo, we have to work together on this messaging. Speak to that resistance a little bit. We're okay over here. We're doing fine, Sean. Just
Right.
let us do our thing.
And a lot of that comes from ego. So people
Mhm,
don't like to have their territory treaded on and they have an
mhm.
ego. And so bringing in somebody who has that ability to kind of break down those barriers is helpful. And I can be honest with you, when I first started, the county level coordinator was not somebody that we had an easy time kind of, getting past on some of these regional things. So he wasn't as friendly to deal with. And, sometimes people you have to, work within your scope, but you have to maybe sometimes work without their input just because you want to keep things moving. You do the
Yeah.
right thing for your community. And, we weren't doing anything that was inappropriate, but we didn't include that person. And then when that person left, we included the next person and said, hey, these were the barriers that were in front of us. And ever since, that position has always been very helpful now, moving forward. So
Yeah.
personalities can cause you a breakdown. And so people are a very important part of it. So it's really hard to always get the right person. And then events affect things. Our program went through a major transition during COVID because we couldn't be together. We were doing things remotely, like we're talking here. So that really impacted how we operated and what our normal operation mode was. And then as COVID started to subside and people started getting together again, we were in that mode where we were disconnected. So it took a long time to build that back up. And we transitioned some people during that time. And so all that, what I think is the process of emergency management, broke down a little bit because people didn't stick with the process that we had prior to COVID. They kind of fell back on some of the virtual stuff and things that we did during.
Real lesson in that. Going back to that sort of infrastructure of relationship, what you just expressed is that there was a significant impact of actually being together. It was a part of the cohesion that you experienced. And the workaround, which is to say, some people are not going to be as willing to come together and be partners, and that perhaps I have two theories about this. One theory is there's that ego and that protection of what you feel is, your area of expertise. I also think the other theory I always balance is this somebody who doesn't want to be seen for not having the level of competence that might be required to do the works. If it's the second, that's a different kind of approach. So you might invite in a way that feels accepting without pointing it out necessarily. But if it's the first, it's almost as if you have to work around. But I think in this conversation, I really think about the elected officials who need to pay attention to what's happening in their area of emergency management and not just assuming that everything is going fine. So if you have a director who is very sort of authoritative and not necessarily good at facilitating those conversations that help people to see the value of coming together, working together. So there can be some real friction with a style of leadership that might make working across silos difficult.
Yeah.
Or
Across the Commonwealth, you'll find that we have to work with the Pennsylvania State Police a lot on things. And that relationship is a very difficult one in some areas. And not any fault necessarily of an individual, but the system that the state police have is one where they transition a lot, new commanders and new supervisors within barracks and stuff. And so that inconsistency of staffing sometimes leads to that barrier that every time you get a new person within your barracks or your troop for the state police, you're trying to build that relationship again. That's one of the benefits in my region is I deal with mostly municipal policing, and the state police, our relationship's good because Penn State has that working relationship because of their needs on their special events. So locally, we benefit because of that relationship's already established. But sometimes I hear the struggles of dealing with the state police and getting them into that working group because they're a major player. There's no doubt about that. But getting the time commitment to bring them down to that local level because their areas are so big sometimes is more difficult. And that's just one example.
No, that's a great example. And I think about what Penn State must bring to the conversation in my own area, because I live in Hershey. The questions I have on my mind, and I would love to dig into this a little bit more, is you've got a big corporation. And you have a big medical center and you have Milton Hershey Trust. And so I'm curious about how the communication happens between sort of the local level, all the surrounding sort of local governments with these really big institutions, which I'm imagining have their own sort of layers of emergency management type people. And so you must have in Penn State that kind of need to make sure you're all talking.
Yeah. And just from the standpoint, so I just have a little history with the Hershey issue, but I know that during COVID, there was some meetings that we discussed some of their planning around. I think it was if I recall, it was a foot race, maybe it was 5K or half marathon or something that they would put on, and how Hershey corporate had to work with the local police and their staffing for the events. And that was one of the relationships that really prompted me to emphasize the need for that partnership. So Hershey was one of the ones that I kind of modeled after originally.
Right.
Knowing that they had that relationship between a corporate entity and the government as well. And like I said, I don't know if they're still doing that, but that's the exact kind of thing that needs to happen, whether it's a major institution like Penn State or a major medical center or just your major corporation in your community that's your major employer. That's the kind of the coordination that needs to occur, whether you're a small town or, a mid-sized city. It certainly does. And then obviously the major urban areas are a little different, but they have their own issues.
So we haven't really touched so much in our conversation about how the future may look to the generations coming up. Certainly, I think that the field must be changing to respond to the sort of novel events that are happening now. I'm curious if there's been sessions or conversations about what's changing, about the nature of events, anything that you can talk about with respect to what the next generation really is going to be challenged with in this field of emergency management that maybe is a little different from your 40 years.
Yeah, so I think our ability to communicate has changed significantly. And that
Positive? For the positive? I
some
mean,
days,
I'd like to
right?
think so. I mean, it used to be if there was a disaster, I remember being on the road, I'm switching the radio stations.
Yeah.
Please tell me, like,
Tell me
what,
what's going on.
yeah.
Or the next day in the paper, you read about it. That's what I grew up,
Yes. It's like that
right?
didn't help me yesterday when I was on the road.
And today it's a matter of my phone buzzes and I know what's happening halfway around the world. And so that is a challenge and an opportunity. It's a challenge in our local communities in terms of trying to make sure that we're have the appropriate information vetted to our community so that they're getting the right information after a disaster, where to respond, how to respond. And then it's a benefit in that we have the ability to send that information out and hit everybody if we're using it properly, and
Mhm.
get them the right information. So the next emergency manager is somebody who's well versed in our communication systems, our social medias, and those type of things, as well as engaged with the community on all aspects. I think it's not just the fire chief that becomes the emergency manager or the public works person that's wearing that hat. I really think it needs to be somebody who's engaged in your community and has that passion for wanting to coordinate those players.
It's like that community engagement is really at the core if somebody is thinking about this as a field. I think emergency management is a great example of work that is not going to go away. There's so much of public sector in local government that I think can't go away because it is about community engagement. That if you have those skills and you are willing to take the time to build local knowledge on top of what I'm sure there is some very important use of AI for tracking, documenting, predicting, I don't know, the kinds of events that might be happening, but it's certainly weighted more heavily in the people side, the aspect of being able to connect with the community.
So if you think about all your weather forecasts, that's where your AI is really going to take hold, and the good information we're able to put into AI to predict what's going to happen and things like that will be a big benefit. But the ability to then coordinate those people to help respond to that is going to be where the human factor is going to be involved.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not going to be a computer that's going to just light up and get everybody working together.
Yeah. But locators have been operational for a long time, but more people will have locators if there are severe events and you need to know if they
Right.
are. So it is an exciting field. I have always been enamored with the various roles in emergency management, how it all comes together. I'm not sure I would be cut out for it because I would be terrified of the scenarios that you work through. But I am from a just the day to day understanding of the importance of safety. I am just a huge advocate. And I hope this episode brings home this idea that we have many people working in this field. And I like what you said that emergency management isn't just going to be a title that you happen to get, that it's going to be something with more intention behind it, somebody that has some requisite people skills. And I'm sure technical local knowledge would be important as well. Do you see it happening at Penn State? Are there courses that are more designed for this field?
Yeah, so there's several opportunities, not just at Penn State, but for people to get undergraduate and graduate degrees in Homeland Security and have
Mm,
emphasis on certain things. We just had a firefighter that was at Penn State who graduated and went on to get his doctorate and studied, Homeland Security during that time. And he's a firefighter in Washington, D.C. now. And when he's
yeah.
off the shift, he's teaching online. And
Yeah.
it's just those amazing things that, people are able to do with the information that they're given nowadays.
That's really exciting. That would be an
Yeah.
interesting person to talk to as well. But it seems to me that that seed is that volunteer service. Like if you're volunteering at a young age and you like it, there's probably going to be opportunities in the future that are going to allow you to get more education just through your participation with local government? Would that be
That's
something?
very fair. Yeah. So for myself, I never, when I started at age 17, thought I was going to be an emergency management coordinator, right? I wanted to be a firefighter and wanted to do these things. But then as time went on, I recognized I was working as a 911 dispatcher and had to work with the county coordinator on a regular basis and recognized there was a need for more people to get involved in that avenue. And that's pretty much where I saw the path that I needed to take. And then, like I said earlier, you have a passion, fall in love with certain
Yeah.
things. That's where you go.
It can be unexpected, but really delightful. And I just, again, I want to just sing your praise in terms of your leadership there. You were recommended for this interview. And I know the Southern Region Council of Governments have been a huge contributor to helping to pull together. And I know there's many others. As you've said,
Right.
it takes a lot of people to make a successful operation. So thank you for representing the region. And I look forward to maybe some future conversations and this will be part of the APMM series. So I think you're going to get a lot of listeners from your area. That's the Association of Pennsylvania Municipal Management. So thank you
Right.
so much for being on today, Sean.
Well, thanks for
I
having
really
me.
appreciate it.